Now, let me share with you the contrasting and deeply worrying stories of two prisoners in the Middle East. In the first, it's a sickening case where Australians have been warned about a former Afghan army soldier who murdered 3 Australian diggers in cold blood, and the fact that he could soon be set free. Hekmatullah, who was working and training alongside the Australians, slaughtered 3 diggers while they were sitting and playing cards in 2012, and he served 7 years since then in prison as a result. But he's one of thousands of imprisoned terrorists slotted to be freed under a peace deal being brokered in Afghanistan with the Taliban. Now, as if this isn't disgusting enough, it stands in stark contrast to the plight of an innocent Australian woman imprisoned in neighbouring Iran. There's absolutely no link between these cases, of course. It's just that the way they're unfolding in the same region at the same time that highlights the injustice. Kylie Moore-Gilbert is a promising academic specialising in Shia communities in the Middle East. She was studying and researching on a visit to Iran in August 2018 and was arrested as she was waiting to leave from Tehran's airport. She's been held in jail for 2 years since, accused of being a spy, denied justice and freedom. It seems clear that Moore-Gilbert is being held as a political hostage, not a legitimate suspect, by a regime at odds with the West on a range of issues. It is appalling. And Australia's approach has been one of quiet diplomacy rather than public advocacy so far. But is that the right approach? What pressure can Australia and the rest of the world bring to bear on this case? Let me bring in a man who's been through a similar trauma, 400 days in an Egyptian prison. Peter Greste joins me live from Brisbane. Thanks for joining us, Peter. Can I start off first up, before we get into the diplomacy and the politics? When you think about Kylie Gilbert Moore as a human being, what would you suggest is the most important thing she needs to keep in mind to get through a trauma like this?
Chris, the one thing I realised fairly quickly when I was in prison and spent a period in solitary confinement is that the whole point of prison is to mess with your head. It's designed to break you psychologically. And so your first responsibility is to deal with your own psychological health. In a way, that's much more serious than even your physical health, because I think that your body's much more likely to follow if your brain isn't in the right place. It's very, very difficult to do under those sorts of circumstances, being isolated, being in solitary confinement, being separated from friends and family, being under enormous pressure is incredibly difficult to stand up against, to hold your confidence, to hold yourself together. But that's what prison is designed to do, and so the greatest form of resistance is to keep your psychological strength together. Yeah, well, she must be strong. It's been 2 years already. It's a shocking case. It happened very quietly. We didn't even know she was there for a year, and the Australian government, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs, has been very quiet about this and they're suggesting that's the way to go. But other people who've been through similar experiences, even in that very country, even in Iran, say that that's the wrong approach, that we've got to do more to keep this in the public eye around the world. What's your view on that, and what ought Australia be doing? Look, I'm inclined to agree. As you said, this case has been going on for 2 years, and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Kylie's family have all said that, look, we need to allow time for quiet diplomacy to work. They've all said that public pronouncements make it harder to negotiate, put more pressure on Kylie, that makes things easier for the Iranians. But after 2 years, if in fact that strategy has not only not worked, but made things worse for her, we've seen a situation deteriorate, then to continue that strategy in the hope that something might change seems to me to be frankly quite foolish. I know that my family got similar advice from DFAT when I was in prison, and for a whole host of reasons, some of which were beyond my family's control, we decided to go public. And I think that if we had followed DFAT's advice, I would still be in prison. Now, I want to be careful about translating our situation over to Iran. While there are a lot of very close parallels and similarities between our cases, Iran is clearly not Egypt, and Kylie's personal circumstances and background and so on are all very different to mine. But I still think that that lesson remains. As you mentioned, it's not just me who's been saying this. The one person who I think really has got some valid experience and understanding of Iran is a guy called Jason Rezaian, who was a Washington Post journalist, who was also arrested and held in Iranian prison, the same prison where Kylie was held before she was recently moved to another prison called Qarchak. And Jason's view is, as an Iran specialist and someone who's been in prison, his view is that in fact a public campaign is the right way to go, that it can help to sway Iran and help a situation.
Now, Australia has the benefit of having diplomatic representation in Tehran. We have an ambassador there, Lyndall Sachs. She's been able to check in on Kylie, not often enough, but she's been able to check in on her. But it doesn't seem that that's paid any dividends, us having an ambassador in the country. We would be seen by Iran primarily as a US ally, presumably. And when we talk about Kylie being used as a diplomatic hostage, it's because Iran is at odds with the US and many Western liberal democracies, primarily over their nuclear deal, but other issues.
Well, that's right. I mean, one of the things is it's very difficult for us to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, what negotiations have been taking place, what price the Iranians might be asking for Kylie's release. And bear in mind, too, that Australia's embassy in Iran is, in fact, something that Australia is very keen to hold on to. That Australia won't want to do anything that might jeopardise that diplomatic mission, because it is one of the few Western diplomatic missions in Iran, and it gives us a lot of influence and leverage. And so that has to be factored into this. The thing is that we don't quite know, without knowing what the price is, it's very difficult to know how to play a public campaign, much less a quite diplomatic campaign. But my view is that we need to separate this from any of those negotiations. We have seen no evidence to substantiate any allegations against Kylie Moore-Gilbert. We've seen nothing to suggest she's anything other than the academic that she claims to be. And so unless the Iranians can present that evidence and show all of us unequivocally that she was engaged in something illegal, in illegal activity, then they've got to let her go. The idea that she could be held as some kind of bargaining chip is frankly outrageous to me. She's an individual. She was held as she was leaving the country. She was trying to study the region, as good academics do, and help us all understand what's going on there, and she doesn't belong behind bars.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Raise the profile so the rest of the world, the free world, can see and hear about her story and ask the questions of Iran. Why could she possibly be held there? I think has to be the way forward, as you say, steering away from the political issues. Appreciate you joining us. Actually, just one thing right out of left field. You and I worked 30 years ago, probably, almost 30 years ago, at Channel 10 in Adelaide. As a journalism professor yourself now, these job losses around the country, Network 10 shutting down locally produced news bulletins in Brisbane and Adelaide, that's a terrible thing for the industry.
Yeah, it is, Chris. And as you say, I remember those good old days when you were sitting right across the desk from me. We used to have all sorts of rows and arguments. And I think that was the kind of thing. It's the regional news, the local news, although it's a bit much to call Channel 10 in Adelaide regional and local. But what we're seeing across the country are what the academics are calling news deserts now, the spread of regions that have lost local journalism, and it's often those local newspapers, those local news services, television stations and so on, that hold those communities together. They're the ones that have local arguments and debates about local council policy. They argue about the way that councils have been spending their money. They cover the local sports events, the local dog shows and so on. And they give the communities shape and meaning and focus and identity. And to lose those is, I think, massively important for not just for the higher order, the higher questions of democracy, which of course is absolutely crucial, but also because of the social role that they play. I don't think you can put a price on that.